Uh-oh. Is that... Oh, look at that. We're live.
There we are.
Oh.
Howdy.
Hi. That is just pitiful. Hi.
Oh, you can do better.
Come
Ready?
on.
Hi!
I think they're the best we're going to get. That's okay. Hey, so just at the offset, I just want to thank you for not going to Venkat's talk. That was a bad choice on your part, but I'm glad you're here anyway. Thanks. Thanks for coming. We are stuck in a small room together for 3 hours. It's gonna be fine. Wow. All right. Shall we get underway?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Let's see.
So to find out about you a bit first, how many people like spring?
Wait.
It's almost everyone. Where's the two guys that aren't raising their hands?
Yeah.
There they go. They put them up. Who likes JavaScript? About
Really?
half the room.
Really?
What about TypeScript?
There we go.
That's a little bit better.
Respectable.
Anyone using Angular?
What about Angular 5?
Well,
Come on, it's been out for a week.
What about React? Any React users? Ooh, not very many. Just a few. Anyone doing progressive web apps? 1, 2. Okay. Oh, we got one in the back. 3. Is anyone here for a particular reason? You guys sat in the front, so we get to pick on you. Are you just here for the entertainment, or did you come to learn something in particular? Both? Just to watch us. Spring Cloud? Who's here for Spring Cloud?
Spring Cloud?
Who's here for reactive Spring? Who's here for just Kotlin?
Who's here for beer? I knew it. I knew it.
That's just in Antwerp in general, though, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Who's already on Java 9? I'm just curious. It's been out for like a month. Java 9?
1.
Java 9. Okay, what about Java 8? Oh, that's good. Wait, better yet. Okay, who's not on Java 9 or Java 8? Hey, that's...
Java 7?
Yeah,
6?
that's not a scary number at all. That's
it's like 4.
I could visit all of you and help you upgrade, and you'd be okay. It's such a small number at that point, you know?
Right.
It's very heartening. Okay, well, good stuff. That makes me feel better. Shall we?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So my name is Matt Raible. I'm a hick from the sticks. I grew up in the backwoods of Montana with no electricity and no running water, and I did have to walk 2 miles to the bus stop every day. It was not a fun childhood. But only once I realized my friends had toilets and stuff, and then it was like, that'd be nice in the winter, you know? But yeah, I work for a company called Okta, and we basically do, there's the cabin I grew up in. I was born in one corner. My sister was born in the other. It's still up there in Montana. I work for Okta. Basically, we do user authentication in the cloud, or users as a software service, which is UAS, which isn't a very good acronym, but I like to say user management as a software service. And we basically support all kinds of standards, OAuth, OpenID Connect, and SAML, so it's very easy to integrate authentication into your apps. SAML. Don't recommend it.
What's the first? What does the S stand for?
Simple or something.
I'll bet it is simple. Why do all the things that are really
standard authentication markup language?
Okay, they avoided the SOAP problem.
And, well, they got XML. Lots of it.
Okay. Anyway, and my name is Josh. Josh Long, and nice to meet you. I'm a Spring developer advocate on the Spring team. I'm an open source engineer and contributor, and I have the dubious distinction of having been the #1 most widely lauded, most prolific, most visible, most highly acclaimed contributor of bugs, but number one contributor of bugs to projects like Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, Spring Integration, Spring Batch, FOD, and Time Leaf Activity, etc. More bugs per commit than any other engineer on the Spring team. So that's something, right? I'm an open source engineer, Java champion, and a Spring developer advocate. As part of that, I spend my time in front of groups of people like yourselves, doing training videos and books, and I just finished a couple of videos, Applied Continuous Delivery and Cloud Foundry live lessons, and Spring Boot, building microservices with Spring Boot live lessons. And I just finished my 5th book, which, by the way, is out there on the at the O'Reilly table.
And when did you start that book?
Just forever ago and in 2 days. Right? What is that? Whoa. What is happening?
It's like my computer.
You've got the actual thing on live stream. We were hearing ourselves on the live stream on his laptop in delay. So now I know how far back we are, too.
Right. We're like, 10 minutes back?
Yeah, like... but,
no, but when did you start the Cloud Native Java book?
Forever. Like years ago. 2 years ago.
3 years ago?
2.5 years ago.
Let's give Josh a hand that he finished the book, right? Finally.
So painful. And it took and I'll tell you what took a long time, right? The book is all about how to build applications that survive and thrive in the cloud, and we talk about it in terms of Spring Boot and Cloud Foundry and Spring Cloud. But the reason we were so delayed in getting this book out was because of the deliberation that went into deciding what animal to put on the cover. So anybody who knows anything about O'Reilly books knows that nobody cares what you write in the book itself. It's completely immaterial. It all lives or dies based on the choice of the animal. So we fought long and hard to figure out the right animal for that. And we settled upon a blue-eared kingfisher. That bird is a blue-eared kingfisher, a bird that is indigenous to the Indonesian Java Islands. It is a bird that is indigenous, or in English we'd say native, to the Java Islands in Indonesia. And birds fly. They fly through the clouds. So it's a cloud-native Java bird. It's a bird that flies through the clouds in Java. Never mind. It'll come. Give it time. And of course I work at Pivotal, and at Pivotal we have a lot of great open source software, and we care about the software just like Okta does and so many other great organizations. We care about the software, but that's not the thing that drives us. What we care about most at Pivotal is helping people build better software faster and delivering it into a production environment. And so as part of that, we, along with a lot of other folks, of course, talk to organizations about microservices and how to build these cloud-native applications. And the idea behind this is that you decompose your architecture into small batches of work, and that you do so that you can support small teams, and in so doing, you allow yourself organizational agility. You have small teams working on small code bases. They're independently deployed. They're unblocked from each other, and so you get agility because the cost of change is smaller. You reduce the scope of change. You reduce the impact of change, and so each team has the ability to go faster. And when you move to this architecture, you get a lot of benefits. Agility, of course, being principal and chief among them, but you also introduce complexity. And that complexity is what it can be very problematic for a lot of organizations because they're struggling to sort of address that complexity, and they're ill-prepared. They build these distributed systems that are now talking to each other over the network. Everything becomes a client-server sort of model, and so that complexity is problematic.
Not yet.
Not yet?
Nope.
No?
What are we going to build today?
Right. So that complexity is problematic, and you need to be able to address that. And so today, of course, we're going to talk about that. Right?
Right.
See, I did that. But before we get underway, we need to actually talk about what kind of thing we want to build.
Right. So what basically we want to do is not only show you how you build resilient systems on the back end, but also on the front end. So Josh is going to be live coding on the back end using Spring Boot and Spring Cloud, and then I'll be doing that on the front end with Angular. And we'd like to build something that we feel is useful for you and for us. And so what should we build?
Well, we wanted a domain that would be easy enough to kind of like just accept and then take for granted and then move on. And we want to have a domain that is relevant,
right,
to beautiful Belgium. And so we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could have some sort of service to manage
beer?
Beer, exactly, right? Beer. So we thought about it. We need something to manage an inventory of beer, because if we can't put it in our bellies, we can at least put it in the code, with the hopes of getting there. So we thought about beer, and why beer?
It's pretty much the cause and solution of all life's problems.
Right. So did you know that at any given time, 0.7% of the world is drunk? So right now, there are 50 million people in the world who are drunk at this moment, writing PHP code. It's a fact. It's on the internet. They don't lie on the internet. They can't. That's because it's easy. There's a difference. How many of you have seen this? Not enough. So we'll let you read it. The small font on the screen is huge on this slide. And hopefully this will give the amazing Devoxx organizers time to bring us a chair. Is that going to happen?
We could roll that box over and you could sit on it maybe.
Oh, well. Do you know if there are any chairs coming? Well, everybody read it?
Is there any in the corners?
I'm not sure if they read it.
Oh.
Are you looking for chairs?
All right. I was looking for chairs.
Thank you.
Get one.
We could really use them. Thank you. Okay, good. So somebody here, I'm glad people remember Windows ME. I thought maybe they just repressed it. Okay. So we're gonna write some code today to manage beers, and I think I'll just
Well, we can survey the audience a bit more before we get into it. How many people are actively using Spring Boot? How many people are using it with Java? How many people doing Groovy? We got a few. What's the other one? Kotlin?
Kotlin. How many using Kotlin? How many of you are interested in Kotlin? Good stuff. Hot sauce.
Gradle? 10. Maven? Everyone else. You guys like the color logging, don't you? Like that Maven
Oh,
Colgan.
that's so awesome. Just in time. Like the compiler. Thank you. Oh, it's so cool. Wow. That was awesome. Never works that well usually. All right, I'm going to turn this. Oh, wait, before we get too far in the way. Okay. Should we do the thing?
We got to stand up.
Yeah,
right?
Just, okay.
Prove to our bosses that we're working.
Yeah. Air quotes. Okay, everybody, pretend like you're happy. And okay. Sweet nectar, thanks. Okay, so we're gonna this talk we've done before, but we've done it in Java because why not? But Stefan, our friend asked us to do it in Kotlin, which is fine because we've done talks in Kotlin before, and we did it for the VJug,
right?
Didn't we? We did it
in August. Yep.
Yeah, we did the presentation for the VJug in August, and it was in Kotlin, and people seemed to like that. So we're gonna do this talk in Kotlin, and we'll use that as an excuse to introduce features in Kotlin itself and in Spring, right? But if you have questions about Kotlin, we understand that might be the thing that isn't going to be, if you have questions on that, don't hesitate to throw them out there, right? We're happy to answer. We're also gonna do it in terms of Spring Boot 2.0 and the reactive support. And so there's a lot of bits that you're gonna see today that aren't gonna be sort of your sort of normal demo, I guess. I don't know.
And we have lots of time, so if you have questions along the way, raise your hands, and hopefully we'll see you or just something like that, and we'll hear you.
Exactly. All right. So we're going to build an application here at start.spring.io. How many of you know start.spring.io? All right. So this is my second favorite place on the internet. Anybody who knows me knows that this is my second favorite place on the internet. My first favorite place on the internet, of course, is production. I love production. You should love production. Production is the happiest place on earth. It's better than Disneyland. You should go as early and often as possible. Bring the kids, bring the family. The weather's amazing. But if you're not already in production, you can begin your journey here at start.spring.io. If you want for inspiration in the early morning before a cup of tea or coffee, start.spring.io. If your children are restless and can't sleep, start.spring.io. And if you suffer from indigestion after a long night of alcohol abuse and PHP, start.spring.io. Spring.io. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a new application here. We're going to use the Spring initializer here, and we're going to use the support for building Kotlin applications. We're going to use 2.0, right? So 2.0, Spring Boot 2.0 is due in December of this year. But right now we're at milestone 6, so we're going to use that. We're going to build a new service called the Beer Catalog Service. And we're going to bring in some support that we need. We're going to bring in the actuator for operational concerns. We're going to bring in the reactive web support, right? So we're going to bring in the support for building reactive applications. And we'll talk about reactive in a bit here. We're going to bring in reactive MongoDB. Now, again, we need a data access layer. That's why we're bringing this in. There's a number of different choices here for reactive. You can bring in reactive MongoDB. You can bring in reactive Cassandra, reactive Redis. There's in Spring Data itself. There's Couchbase. There's a number of different reactive drivers that we're going to take advantage of here. All of them are fine choices, but I happen to have MongoDB on my local machine, and it's a great choice, right? If you want to lose your data and you want to lose it reactively, there is no better choice than reactive MongoDB. So here we go, right? I'm kidding. It's a nice database. It's just fine. Just kidding. Anyway, there's that. What else do we need? We need the gateway support. No, we don't need that here, do we? I think this is fine, actually.
For the catalog.
That's for the catalog. No, that's for the Edge service, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We did do REST in the past, but I don't think you did it in this one.
We got reactive web, right? We need Eureka for that, for service registration and discovery. I don't think we need the config server. I think that's probably in it. Okay, so that's the service, okay? So we're going to build that service. And, of course, we could switch to the full version. And if we were so inclined, we could add all these different checkboxes. There's a number of different checkboxes that I encourage you to peruse at your own leisure later on. There's a number of different technologies here that, had we more time, a lot more time, we could cover them. But for our purposes, it suffices to leave things as they are here now. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and build a new project by clicking the big button at the top or at the bottom. But I do want to spend a brief moment here, just a brief moment, looking at these other options here, the artifact, the group, the name, the description, all that stuff, the package, all that stuff you could plug in. And then, of course, we have the choice of packaging, right? And the packaging is where people get confused. A lot of people they struggle with this. They don't know when and where to choose which. So I'm going to do my level-headed best here now to explain. If by some fluke of physics, some terrible, terrible tragedy of time-space, you find yourself somehow transported to the distant, distant, distant past. Far, far, far beyond modern help. Then choose .war. But if you're here with us in 2017, nay, almost 2018, can you believe it? Wow. Then choose .jar. This is a big part of our overarching and guiding personal philosophy of make jar, not war. And again, you have a lot of options. You could do a lot of different things, but I encourage you to stick with the defaults because they're going to work just fine. So we're going to hit generate. That'll give us a new project. I'll open up this project here.
Hey, Josh.
Yes, sir.
Did you know the world's longest hangover lasted 4 weeks after a Scotsman consumed 60 pints of beer?
I did not know that. That's amazing.
It's a good beer fact.
That's an inspired hangover. At that point, that's just inspiration. You're going for a higher purpose, you know?
4 weeks.
Oh. Well, all right. So I've got my zip file, right? I cleaned out the directory and I downloaded it again. Opening this up in my IDE. Doesn't matter what IDE you use. Anything's fine. I'm just curious. How many of you using IntelliJ? Okay. How many of you using some sort of Eclipse? Good stuff as well. Rock on. What about NetBeans? Okay, right on. All of them good choices. Right on. Good, solid choices. You don't need particular support in these IDEs to use Spring Boot. It is just public static void main and Maven or Gradle. Anything will work just fine. We're using I've got the Ultimate Edition. You can use the Spring Tool Suite for Eclipse. You could use the NetBeans, the Spring Boot plugin for NetBeans. All of them are fine choices, but you don't need them, right? It is just Maven and or Gradle and Java 8 in this case, or Kotlin. How about Emacs? Are you here, sir? Where's the Emacs guy? Emacs guy? Where are you?
He's right in the middle.
Can't see him. I can't see. Oh, there he is. Every single city, country, and continent that I go to, I ask, who uses Emacs? And invariably, it's the same guy. The same human being. I use Emacs. And then he leaves. Presumably to troll again. the next place. Oh well. So we've got a Spring Boot application. I'm going to comment out some of the bits that I don't need just yet, right? We're going to comment out the Netflix support. Goodbye to this. And I think otherwise we'll leave it as is. You can see that the Spring Initializer has been nice enough to give us the Kotlin compiler and the reflection library and all that stuff. And we've got plugins down here configured for us. The Kotlin JetBrains Kotlin Maven plugin has been specified for us, as well as a Spring compiler plugin, right? And this works in conjunction with the Kotlin Maven all open dependency here. You see, by default, types in Kotlin are final. In terms of Java, right? They're final by default, but a lot of frameworks in the JVM, including Spring, rely on having the ability to subclasses your types at runtime, right? That's what the basis of a proxy is dynamic subclassing. And so we need those types to be open. And so it gets very tedious to constantly have to go against the grain and say to Kotlin, please don't lock this down by default. You have to prefix everything with the open keyword, right? By default, they're final. You have to open them, whereas in Java, by default, they're open, and you have to lock them down with final. So this Maven all open plugin allows you to say, given a certain condition, which in this case is a condition that we have provided with the Spring compiler plugin. Given a certain condition, we want these types to be open by default. In this case, the condition is that if there's an annotation present, namely one of the annotations that Spring relies on, then those types will be open by default. So you get that benefit by using the initializer. All that's just pre-provided for you, and now we can focus on the code itself. Now we have a Spring Boot application, and today we're going to talk about building an application using sort of the reactive support in Spring Boot 2.0 and Spring Framework 5. So Spring Framework 5 was just released last month, actually, about a month ago, and Spring Framework 5 has a number of other nice features, but the big feature, the big thing that I will hope to impress upon you today is that there is support for building reactive applications. And now this use case isn't new or controversial. It's not like we're the only ones that have solved this problem or even thought about it. And that's exactly why it's so interesting, right? What we're trying to do here is we're trying to model large amounts of data. And again, the theme of our talk today is progressive web applications, applications that do the right thing in the case of failure or possible failure conditions. And one of the big things that people run into when they start building distributed systems is they are now moving data across the network, right? They're not moving intra-process. They're moving data across the network, and this means that data is flowing over sockets. They're input and output, right? This communication can become very, very overwhelming eventually, and the question starts to become, how do I manage an overwhelming amount of data? Right? If I'm doing machine learning or big data or anything like this, the movement of data from one node to another across the network can be very, very expensive. And our services, up until recently, for the longest time, weren't designed to be as efficient as possible in the face of that data, because most of our work wasn't done in terms of I/O. It was done in terms of computation, and everything was kept in the same process. So the conduction of data from one node to another becomes expensive, and we have this inefficiency, right? By the default MO, the default behavior for a typical servlet application, not all servlet applications have this problem, but by default, unless you go out of your way and use the async support, the default behavior for a typical servlet application was to block, right? As a request came in, a thread was opened, a thread was kept open to hold the server socket that then accepted the incoming request. That ultimately got processed, usually in terms of a Spring MVC controller, and then that response was sent back all in the same request cycle. The thread is being kept open the whole time. Well, if the time between when you got a request and the time between when you sent a response was long, as might be the case for large amounts of data or large batches of data, or even just things that have latency or that are not necessarily going to be a continuous stream of data. Maybe you're doing server-side push, or you got a chat system or something like that. If that duration between getting the request and sending the response was more than just a few milliseconds, you ended up blocking. You kept that thread open, right? And on the JVM, threads are expensive. So this is an anti-pattern, right? You don't want to keep that thread monopolized. You've only got a fixed thread pool size for your web server, your average web server. And so if you have one more request than you have threads available in that web server, you're in a bad situation. Hopefully that request will finish, and then you can return the thread back to the thread pool. But if that isn't the case, you're going to be in trouble. So reactive programming gives us an answer to that. It does that because it allows us to rely on primitives that have been available in the operating system for a long time. By default, your network stack in most operating systems is asynchronous. You don't say, I'm going to wait for the next byte and then block. You say, here's a file descriptor or a descriptor. I want you to tell me when there's data available. Notify me. And in the meantime, I'll go on and do something else. I can store the file descriptor elsewhere and ask for a callback, right? The benefit is that now I can respond to new requests as they're coming in, and only when I have an event over there do I then bother to activate a thread and then send back the response. So that's one thing that we need to address. And the other thing is, when you move to this world where you have lots of clients and services and they're distributed across networks, now you have the problem of flow control, right? There's the possibility that one service will produce faster than the other can consume. And this is something that we have to address, we have to think about when you build custom protocols, but we seem to think it's okay to kind of ignore it in the web tier, and it's just not, right? We have to think about that. So we need some mechanism, some way of describing, first of all, that there is this potential data that will come to us eventually, right? Not here now, but it may come eventually, and it may be an overwhelming amount of data. You know, it may be data that will never stop. You know, that's the first thing, is we need some way to model that in our code base. The other thing is that we need to have a way with whatever metaphor we choose. We need to have a way of saying, I'm not able to handle any more than this right now. Don't send me any more data because I can't process it, right? That ability, we call that back pressure. Right? So we need support for that. We need support for both this ability to model an unlimited amount of data, potentially unlimited amount of data that may happen now or may happen, next week. Who knows, right? So it's asynchronous, and we need support for back pressure. Now, we are not the only ones who have thought about this. Of course, right? There's been a number of other players in the Java space that have been trying to solve this, right? We've had support for asynchronous I/O since Java 1.4, more than, what is it now, 15 years? I mean, long time, right? Java 1.4 has had asynchronous I/O, and yet most of us don't write our code in terms of channels and asynchronous I/O in Java 1.4. We write it in terms of higher level abstractions, higher order metaphors. So what we've needed is a common metaphor to describe this kind of interaction with the computer and with the data that was higher than just the low-level channels and low-level concepts for input and output in our base JDK. So a lot of different teams from, I think the original sort of 800-pound gorilla of the space is Netflix's RxJava, which of course was inspired by Rx extensions for .NET from Microsoft Research. There's then Lightbend, which is a company that used to be called TypeSafe. They had a technology called Akka, and now Akka Streams. There's Vertex from Red Hat, which is started by VMware and the Spring team there. And we have on the Spring team, we have a project called Reactor. So there's a number of different projects that have solved or sought to solve this particular use case, to describe this metaphor. And eventually these teams converged. They created a specification called the Reactive Stream specification that provides 4 basic types. These four basic types are super simple. They're deceptively simple. But I want to stress here now, you should not go out and try and build an implementation for these types yourself. This is a bad idea. You'll spend a year and a half trying to do it, and you'll never get it right anyway. So don't bother. Just use one of these implementations. These 4 types are as follows. You have a publisher. A publisher is a thing that produces 0 to n values, an unlimited amount of data, or just one record. Who knows? The point is, it produces data, and it only produces it to something called a subscriber. A subscriber listens for data. The subscriber gets a callback when the subscription is made, and it gets a pointer to that subscription. With that subscription, the subscriber can say, I want to request, n records. I want 10 more records or 100 records. So you've got subscriber, you've got a publisher, you've got a subscription, and if you have a component that both produces data and reads data, we call this a processor, right? That's it. Those are the 4 types. Is that enough? I'd say no, right? There's still higher order things I want to do. I want to be able to filter. I want to be able to map. I want to be able to transform. I want to do all sorts of interesting things to my streams of data. I want to be able to have the same efficiencies, at least, that I have when I work with basic collections in the JDK, right? So higher order processing is required there. So different implementations like Reactor from Pivotal support these operations. But even there, that's not enough, right? We need to be able to have support for that at higher levels of the stack. So, for example, our web tier, our data access layer, etc. So you saw earlier, we created a brand new Spring Boot application, and that Spring Boot application has reactive web and reactive MongoDB. We chose these technologies because they're built to work with the reactive stream specification and with Reactor. Reactor implements, of course, the reactive stream specification. So with that in mind, we're going to build a new application. We're going to build an application here that manages data. Well, of course, we're going to build a class of type, a data class in Kotlin, and we're going to call this, what, beer? And beer, what do we think? We need an ID, of course, so var ID string question mark equals null. What this means in Kotlin is I'm going to create a Java Bean property. Var means that the property is mutable, so I can say set or get. It's going to be named ID. The type is string question mark. String means that it's a string. Question mark means that it's nullable. So I can give this, I can set null on this field. And the default value equals null. So you get a lot of bang for the buck here, right? There's a lot implied by those few characters there. Here, I want to have what, the name?
Sure.
Yeah, just the name. Is that the actual property that we're going to use? Okay, good. So name string question mark equals null. There we are. There we go. There's my data class. Now, this is a very convenient thing in Kotlin. When Kotlin sees data class, it knows to create getters and setters and toString methods and equals and hash codes and all of that stuff for us by default. So this is a full-fledged Java Bean with all the things that we'd expect to have to be able to work with that, right? So we're going to make this a Spring Data document. There we are. Very good. And we're going to say at ID. There we go. Okay, so we have a number of different fields. We have our key, our auto-incrementing value there. And we want to be able to manipulate instances of this data. So I'll create a Spring Data repository. So again, fairly straightforward. We say beer repository. And we're going to create a reactive Mongo repository. And again, if you've used Spring Data, then you know that we had this repository mechanism. A repository is patterned after the domain-driven design pattern of the same name. The idea is that we want to have something that handles the tedious, boilerplate, soul-annihilatingly boring read and write and sort of data management lifecycle of building applications, or of talking to databases. Sorry? Why should the ID be immutable? Because by default, it's null, and then you're going to set it. It could be not mutable, I guess. In theory, yeah. We could try. I'm not even sure if that would work. Let's see what happens. Actually, and we know this one. Let's just see. We'll try, okay? I'm not even sure. I'm just assumed that the framework is going to try and set that with the value after the object's been created. ORMs, but hey, happy to try. So we've got a repository, and the repository, and by the way, the question, for those of you who are watching on the stream, I'm sorry, the question was, why should the ID be mutable? And the answer was what I just gave. All right. So we've got a repository, and this is going to handle the tedious, soul-annihilatingly boring data management operations. Things like inserting records into the database, inserting them, finding them all, etc. But here you can see that the reactive repository, instead of just returning void or the entity in question, returns an object of type mono. A mono is a publisher that produces either 0 values or 1 value. So it's a reactive streams publisher, just like we talked about earlier, but it's a specialization, right? There's mono is a very common thing in Reactor. It is based on a publisher, so you can talk about it and treat it as a publisher, but it has the extra documentational value of being a specific type of publisher, a ranged or bounded publisher. And then we have down here other methods that, given multiple entities, return something called a flux. A flux is a reactive stream is a reactor type that implies 0 to n values. So either 0 or as many values as you can imagine, or infinite. It could be just on and on forever. A flux is an unbounded publisher, whereas a mono is bounded to 1, right? They're both publishers. You can talk about them both in the same way. You can treat them as publishers if you want. But it is very useful to know what type of data it is, right? If you have a client that's going to display a user interface, do you display a single text field, or do you display a scrolling grid, right? How do you know once you have that subtype there? Okay, so we've got a beer repository. Now, I want to create some data and save it to the database. So I'm going to say sample beer repository, and we're going to extend the application runner, and this is going to be a callback object in Spring. This callback object is an object that we're going to run when the application starts up. It's going to be invoked by the framework, and the arguments are going to be passed into the application for us to work with. These are the wrappers around public static void main. You can see here we've got the arguments. The name comes first in Kotlin, and then the type. It's an array of strings. Well, this Spring Boot application may be launched into the contexts where the arguments don't just come from public static void main. So we have wrappers, application argument wrappers. But basically, it's just a public static void main method. And because it's in a Spring managed component, you can inject things. So for example, I want to inject the beer repository and make it, or rather assign it to a private field. This syntax here, again, it says I have a constructor. This is my primary constructor. I'm injecting the beer repository by its type, and I want the resulting field to be, or the property to be private. So I can use that. I want to write data to the database. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want to create some sample names, and we'll write them to the database so that we have something to work with. So let's say beers, val beers equals flux.just. And here is where we need audience participation. This is the hardest part of the talk for us because we have to talk about and think about all these beers without beer. So let's get it over with.
So we need some names, some beers that you like, and we'll take some you don't like as well.
Mm-hmm.
Budweiser.
That's in the don't like, I assume, right?
Right.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. We started from the bottom. Now we're here, right? So. What?
Triple Carmelite.
How did TRIP like that? Now the last one is sure. KA. Come on, one at a time. Is that right or no? What? Like that? Woohoo! Oh dear. Okay. So we just got to do 20 more of those. It won't be so bad. No, I'm just kidding.
Like a Duvel. That's easy, right?
I can spell that one. There we are. Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Next. How do you spell that one?
KWAK.
KWAK. Okay. Like, is that right?
Yeah.
Hooray! Good. Next.
I heard Heineken.
How do you spell HIEN? Like that?
Right.
Okay.
But we need some bad ones and good ones, right?
Sapporo. Isn't that Japanese?
How about
Tsingtao. That's Chinese. What's the one from Brazil? San Miguel. That's interesting. Good. Conambel. Where's that from? France, I think. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Next. What is it? How do you spell that one? Yes, exactly. How does okay? Wait, KRLSBERG like that?
And it's got a C.
It's got a C.
Yeah.
Son of a gun. Sorry.
There you go.
Next.
We can end the pain if you want.
It's.
You want to keep going?
We gotta have some. So, do you see a significant list of bad ones?
So here's one of our beer facts here. I like to question the crowd since I assume a lot of you are from Belgium. Until the 1970s in Belgium, table beer was served in school refectories. Is that true? I mean, you guys are probably a lot older than that, but do you know what kind of beer it was? Maybe we could get buff.
Like, how do you spell that?
GET, GIT.
What?
GIT. No.
Oh. Is that right? So, cowfoot? Or bullfoot or something? Okay.
I can relate one to Russia. How about Baltica Porter?
Baltic?
Tika, and then space porter.
Like that?
And that one goes with the fact that beer was not considered an alcoholic beverage in Russia until 2013.
Did not know that. I did not know that. Okay. So we've got some beers. Open source as in beer. Or free as in beer. There we go. So we're going to write some beer to the database. What I want to do is I'm going to turn each one of these beers into a object. I'm going to write it to the database. I'm going to turn it into a beer object. So I'm using the map method here on the publisher. Right? What I have here is a publisher, of course. So I'm going to say map each element in that stream, in that publisher, into a beer. So I'm going to say beer name equals it. Right? It is an implicit parameter. I could have used a name lambda parameter. I could say name and then just map it to the name. But by default, like Groovy, by default in Kotlin, if you don't specify the lambda argument and you have one parameter, it's given the name it. And it, of course, in this case, is a string, right? Because that's what we mapped. So now I want to map it to a beer, and then I want to save that into the database. So I'm going to flat map that. I'm going to unpack the previous publisher full of publishers. I'm going to unpack it and write it to the database. I'm going to say beer repository dot save, passing in, again, it. All right? So what I want to do now is I want to run this code, but the problem with this, of course, is that nothing's going to happen. Right? By default, a publisher needs to be activated. You need to have a terminal function, something that invokes it and causes it to run. So we need to subscribe to that. But before we do that, I want to actually, first of all, I want to say to the beer repository, I want to say delete everything in the database first. Then I want to chain that together. Then I want to say, activate the pipeline there. The pipeline that we've built there. Then use the beer repository to find all the records. And then finally, I want to subscribe. And subscribe is the callback here where I can listen to the incoming responses that come back. So I'm going to say, let's print out all the records that come back. Okay. So I'm using this as an excuse to introduce both Kotlin and the Reactive Streams API. We're going to write some data to the database. Let's see if that's worked. Run this code. This method should look fairly familiar if you've done Java. You know basically what's happening here. We're extending the application runner. We're implementing the application runner interface, or if we're extending it, it's the same symbol, just like in C# or C++. Right? We are specifying override. Right? This is actually part of the language. You have to explicitly say I'm overriding a method, very much like C#. But otherwise, it works as we expect. There's the data written on the console. Everything is as we expect. And if we run this 10 more times, because I'm deleting everything, then we'll still have the same result in the database. Now, this code works just fine. This is very Java-esque. This is a very Java-esque way of creating this class, of creating this callback interface. But we have a nice DSL in Spring 5, Spring Framework 5. You see, Spring Framework 5 also ships with native Kotlin support. There's Kotlin DSLs in Spring 5 and in other technologies that are in the Spring ecosystem that build on Spring 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the Spring application builder, and we're going to build, we're going to tell it that we want to run the Spring Boot application using this beer catalog application, right? We want to tell it to run using the arguments that are passed in here, and we want to tell it to configure beans using an initializer. And we're going to use a custom DSL here called the beans DSL. See that? That's a type-safe element that I'm bringing in from a Kotlin extension or Kotlin DSL in Spring Framework itself. I didn't have to add anything to the class path to get that support. It's just in Spring itself. The other thing you should appreciate or see or register is that this is a class, but it is independent of this function. There are in Kotlin they're called member functions or just functions. You have a global function or a top level function, and if you have a function inside of a class, it's not a method, it's called a member function. So if you have no members in the class, then you don't need to have the curly brackets. But because I haven't specified the curly brackets, don't misunderstand me. This is not actually a member of that class, right? It doesn't need to be. So I've got a class, and then I've got a top-level function, and that is a Spring Boot sort of. I'm initializing my Spring Boot application. Now I'm going to use this DSL here. I'm going to use this beans DSL to register a bean programmatically. And the benefit of doing that in this case is that I don't have to have this high-level type called the sample beer repository polluting my namespace. I can just have this little sort of thing in the configuration, and I don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to say application runner, and then I'm going to write the same basic code as a bean that I'll register here. But I need the beer repository, just as before. I need the beer repository to do my work, and we can see that the beer repository is a bean that we had injected for us. I need to look up that bean in this new DSL. I need to look up that bean like this. I can say val beer repository, and I'll say val beer repository equals, and here I'm going to use a type-safe DSL in the Kotlin world for Spring to look up a bean by its type in the application context. Now, you see that I'm saying ref beer repository, but I'm not specifying a class literal. You see, we have the amazing ability in Kotlin to sort of cheat a little bit with type reification. You know that by default the JVM forgets its generic parameters for instance variables. But we have this facility in Kotlin called a macro, or not a macro, an inline function, which is basically a macro. Basically, when you see inline in front of a function in Kotlin, the language copies and pastes. The compiler copies and pastes that code into the call site, right? And the benefit is that we can actually capture in a token at the call site the generic parameter. So I can write code saying I have a reified type T, and then I can actually call t.getClass, right? You can't do that with regular class literals with regular generic types in Java. That's not a thing you can do. But we can do that because of the sort of this effect here, right? So here we can say ref beer repository, and that's it. I don't have to do anything more. That'll give me a reference to a beer repository in the application context. And now I can get rid of this. Oh yeah. Good stuff. So we have an application runner. Eh?
When you're talking about the DSL,
Yes.
for injecting the bean, what is the, maybe it's a stupid question, but what is the benefit of doing so with the DSL versus the old way of injecting it?
It's all about style. This is a DSL that you can use. It's a type-safe Kotlin DSL. If you're using Kotlin, this may be more natural. This is called functional bean definitions. You can do the same thing in Java. We have a functional bean definition API, but it's not as clean as this because it's not, Kotlin gives us this very nice DSL. The other thing is that by doing this here, by registering it as a bean using the functional bean definition, I can make very clear that this is not actually interesting code. It's not something it's not a domain type. It's not a class at the top level that I want to pollute my namespace. It's just a thing that needed to happen as a side effect.
It's what we were doing with the old XML than the old annotation Spring.
No, you're registering a bean. You're telling Spring this is a bean, and I want you to invoke this object, to manage this object for me, this application runner. I'm creating an instance of the application runner interface. This is a functional lambda, and so inside that implementation, I have this code. It's just a bean, but it's not a top-level type. I can move it to the side. It's kind of like if I had a configuration class at configuration class myconfig. I could do the same kind of thing. I could say fun init equals application runner. But again, here I'm creating a whole class. I'm creating a method, and I have a return value, the application runner. This is a Java configuration style thing, and you can still do that in Kotlin. You may very well do that. But what I wanted to make you aware of is that there's also this alternative called functional bean definition registration that is very Kotlin-esque. It's very, very concise. Okay? And all that works, and nothing that you knew before doesn't work. It's just that there's alternatives. Okay, so we've got this bean definition registration, and we've got these two types. So now I have data in the database. Let's build an API, right? Build something to actually serve up that data. And again, here we could say class beer rest controller at rest controller, and we'll create a get mapping. So I'm going to say beers, fun beers, and here I'm going to inject the beer repository, private val beer repository, and I could say this dot beer repository dot find all, and that would work, right? That actually I would get a Spring Webflux REST controller. It's a controller that looks like Spring MVC, but actually, even though this is a Spring MVC annotation, what we're actually having is a reactive endpoint here, right? Let me specify single instance only. Here we are. Very good. Let's start that again. So I have now, if I go to the application, localhost beers. So there's my beers, right? That's it looks very similar to what we've done before, and that's by design, but make no mistake, this is very different. We're actually returning a publisher. So there's a lot of things that have to happen here for this to work. The web runtime has to know to send data back as it gets it, right? It can't wait for the end of the file. There is no end of file buffer. There's no end of file marker, basically. This is a potentially unlimited amount of data. It's a publisher. So that runtime has to be able to support that. But you can run Spring Web Flux on traditional servlet environments, and it'll adapt using the asynchronous support in those servlet environments where appropriate. But by default, in Spring Boot, as we've seen today, we're actually using Netty. This is a brand new reactive web runtime in Spring Framework 5, right? That is using that we built and ship with Spring Framework. So this is not a servlet application at all. Now, this is certainly, like I say, you can do this. That certainly works, and that's a natural thing. But again, we have these nice functional reactive DSLs inside of Spring Framework 5. So let's take advantage of a new DSL here called the router. This is a functional reactive approach to registering web endpoints. So I'm going to create a web endpoint here called beers, and that endpoint is going to return a payload. I'm going to use the repository here. I'll say repository equals ref beer repository, and I'm going to tell the endpoint here to return all the data. And you can see here that we have this. I should put that here at least. I think we have here in the beer repository. We have here in the beer repository this call called body, and it's taking a payload of type publisher. It's taking that value. In the Java DSL, there's a second parameter here of type class. We need to tell the web runtime, web flux, we need to tell it that it needs to do data framing. It's going to get a publisher that produces a trillion values. So it cannot wait until the end of the last JSON object and then send the response back to the client. So we need to tell it what a single record looks like. And we give it a class literal so that it knows that each record is of the shape of a beer, right? It knows to try and encode one beer, send it on, code another one, send it on, etc. We need to tell it that so that it can, efficiently send the data back. We don't need to tell it that over here with this, right? Because it can look at the return value of the method itself, right? The method in this case is actually something like publisher of beer, right? So it can look at that and go, oh, the generic signature is of type beer. I'll know to encode one beer at a time like that. But in this case, we don't have that, right? So we need to explicitly tell it that it's a beer, and we have to tell it like that. That is what you have to do in Java. But again, thanks to the reified type, mechanism in Kotlin, we don't have to. We can just say body of this, and thanks to that inline function, that'll get encoded for you and used to figure out the result. So now let's try this endpoint.
Do you know slugs like beer?
Did they?
Yeah.
Well, who doesn't?
True.
Good to know. Okay, so curl HTTP localhost 8080/beers. Whoops. JSON PP. All right, very good. So we've got our beers endpoint. And we're using two different DSLs here. We're using one DSL, rather. We're using the Bean DSL, and then we're using the Spring Web Flux Functional Reactive Kotlin DSL, which is a bit of a mouthful. All right, so that's our service.
Right.
We should build a client.
Well, it's also not very resilient at this point. Did you want to do the Spring Cloud stuff? Or
We will. Oh, yeah. But I'm saying if we're going to build a client, we need to be able to make it easy for it to find the service.
Oh, right.
So one thing that becomes problematic when you start to move to this market architecture of microservices is you need to make it easy for one service to find and work with another. And by the way, before I continue, actually, let me just take a moment to, if we didn't have this data here, if we didn't have this, certainly not something you do in a real production application, you'd see that the whole application is very, very trivial, right? It's a very, small bit of code to make this work, which I can't believe we are able to do that nowadays, with a nice statically typed language. So anyway, we need to make it easy for one service to find and work with another. And things come and go in a dynamic cloud-based environment. As things come and go, they lose their IP address, right? As an IP address disappears, other clients that are expecting to be able to talk to that service are going to be disappointed if they make a call to that same service at that same IP address. So we need to have some sort of indirection between the client and the service. We could use DNS, but DNS suffers from a number of limitations in a dynamic cloud-based environment. The first of which is that DNS is a very simple protocol. It can tell us where something lives, not if it lives, and that distinction is very important. You may know where I live, but you don't know if I'm actually at home, for example. You know my address, but that's not the same as knowing if I'm going to respond if you knock on the door. The same thing is true for my distributed system. I need more than just the knowledge of where that thing is supposed to be. I need to know if it actually is there. Additionally, I want to be able to control routing and load balancing. And so I need control over that. In order to do that, I need to be able to ask the question, what services are out there? If there are 10 services, I want to control load balancing. I want to control how I pick a particular node. It's a very common thing to have more nuanced load balancing discussions or needs than just basic LRU, least recently used, or round robin load balancing. So I want to be able to control that. And if there are no instances out there, of course, then I want to be able to say, oh, never mind, I'll degrade gracefully. Instead of making a call that's not going to ever respond, I'll just do something else, right? This the support here for reactive programming is very good if you have a lot of data and you have a service able to respond. You can manage the contention there. But if you have no services, well, then you can't reactive your way out of that. You need to be able to just degrade gracefully. So in order to give us that visibility of the system, to give us the ability to ask questions of the system, we're going to use a service registry. And there's a number of service registries out there, but we're going to use Netflix's Eureka. Spring Cloud has an abstraction called the Discovery Client abstraction. You can use it with a number of different service registries. We're going to use the Eureka service, so Eureka-service. I'll say Eureka server. We're going to bring in that's it actually. We're just going to use Eureka server. I'm going to go ahead and do it in Java because
why not?
Why not? It's an annotation. Let's see. So, UAO, Eureka-service. Ooh. We're low on time, my friend.
No, you got like 15 minutes.
Okay, well. So, we'll go to the Eureka service, and then I'll write some Java code for you. Don't say I didn't write Java code. There. So, we do need to configure some stuff. So, server port 8761. Eureka, register, something with Eureka, false, clients, what else do we, fetch, registry equals false. Very good. So we'll spin that up. That'll spin up on port 8761. This is a demo. You'll probably have a load balanced, clustered version of Eureka running somewhere otherwise. Or you can use a platform like Cloud Foundry, and Cloud Foundry has it for you. You need some sort of recipe that you can just reuse. But for our purposes, we'll use that one because it's easy to get working. And now we can build a client. And that's what we'll do. We'll build a client to talk to that service. Again, using Kotlin. And we're going to use we're going to call this the edge service? Mm-hmm. Edge service, just edge service. And we're going to use reactive Spring Boot 2.0. Reactive Web. We're going to use Spring Cloud Gateway. We're going to use Actuator, Hystrix, Eureka. That's it.
Pain, is that in there?
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay.
We're good. All right, good stuff. Look at that.
Did you know at the wife carrying world championships in Finland, first prize is the wife's weight in beer?
What? Did you hear?
Wife carrying world championship.
That's a thing? Okay.
Proud to be Finnish.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Here we go.
I like this one. Norway's first aircraft hijacking was resolved after the hijacker surrendered his weapon in exchange for more beer.
Solves a terrorism problem.
Right.
Oh, dear. Okay. So we've got a client. And we're going to build a client that'll talk to the service via the service registry. So we'll say @enable discovery client. And we need to make our service that we built over here able to talk to the service registry. And so we'll go back and we'll reinstate the Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka client. And we'll say @enable discovery client. Or not. @enable discovery. There we are. Now I think, but I'm not sure that in the latest release, this discovery client annotation is actually redundant. You don't need it, but just so we're sure, we'll leave that there. And we also need to give our application a name. We'll say Spring application name equals beer catalog -service. And we'll restart one more time.
I don't know if you guys get this kind of performance when you're doing Spring Boot development, but we've done comparisons between Josh's Linux laptop and my Mac, and he's about 3 times faster. So if you're doing a lot of Java development, look into Linux.
There we are. So there's my beer catalog service. Okay, and there's the service. It's available at this IP, this service ID, and this port, etc. Now we can build a client that'll talk to it, like I say. So we're going to go back to our Edge service here, and the Edge service will be Spring application name equals Edge-service, and we want the application to start up and register itself there. So I think that's going to be okay. Now we're not building just a service for the sake of building a service. We're not building a client for the sake of building a client. What we're doing is we're actually building a Edge service, something that's going to be the first port of call for requests coming in from the client, from the outside world, from things like our iPhone or our PlayStation or Xbox or Roku or Android device, our iPad, or
The web?
the web, which is a thing still. So today we're going to have a HTML5 Angular progressive web application that's going to need to talk to our backend service, and it has its own particular requirements. It may have security, it may have authentication, it may have requirements to be able to talk to different endpoints that it can't get out of, it can't get out of the sandbox. And so we need to be able to address those client-specific concerns somewhere. Rather than retrofitting every single downstream microservice to accommodate the introduction of a new client, we're instead just going to centralize those concerns here in this Edge service. You'll have one Edge service per client, per outside client, right?
Right.
Anything to add to that? No? Okay. So we're going to build an HTML5 Edge service, if you will. So what is when you're building an HTML5 application, you want to make it easy for that application to be able to talk to all of our services. HTML5 applications live in a sandbox. So one way to get around that, of course, is to add access control origin headers to every single deployed service in the architecture. But of course, that's a non-starter, right? We're trying to keep the agility that we hope to gain by moving to microservices. And if we have to deploy every single downstream service just to accommodate the introduction of a new client, we'd lose that agility. So instead of doing that, we can centralize. We can either proxy the data from the client to the downstream services through the Edge service. That's one way to do it. And Spring Cloud has a new project called Spring Cloud Gateway, which is built on top of Spring Framework 5. It requires Spring Framework 5. Spring Framework 5, by the way, requires Java 8 as a minimum, and it requires it requires Java 8 as a minimum, and so as a result, Spring Cloud Gateway also requires that. It requires the reactive support in Spring Cloud, in Spring Framework as well. So we can use Spring Cloud Gateway, and we can create custom routes. So let's actually proxy the data from the downstream service using Spring Cloud Gateway. Now, how many of you have ever used Zool? Netflix Zool. So this is kind of like an alternative to that. Netflix Zool certainly works, and we still support that, of course, but Spring Cloud Gateway is a reactive-first API. It supports other protocols besides HTTP. It also supports the Reactive Streams initiative, and it is ongoing. The development is going to be, it's active right now. So it has it's an alternative approach than using Zool. So we're going to say run args. We're going to say, the sources are going to be here, .sources. I'm going to say Edge service application, and we're going to pass in some initializers, beans. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to register the support for we want to create a route that actually routes to our downstream service. That's one way to get around the fact that we have this cross-origin restriction, this single origin. So one way to do that is to create a route, a Spring Cloud Gateway route that actually proxies requests from the outside to the downstream service. So we can say gateway. Oh, I also need the Kotlin extensions. I forgot to bring that in. That's not at the moment in the current release in the default jar that we brought in for Spring Cloud Gateway. So I say Spring Cloud Gateway Kotlin extensions, bring in that, And then, okay, so gateway is a bean that I'm going to register. And gateway requires a route, and inside the route we give it an ID. And so here we're going to proxy the downstream service, beer catalog hyphen service. We're going to say that the predicate is that when somebody makes a request to our local edge service that matches beer catalog hyphen service or, beers, original beers. What's wrong with this? Predicate. Do I have the wrong import? Oh, thank you. Awesome. Use the second one, not the third or the first. Okay? So you can see here that I'm using a infix function in Kotlin. This is actually part of the DSL. I'm saying path dot or parenthesis, right? That's what is actually happening behind the scenes. But because that or function is annotated with the token called infix, I can use it like this. I can use it without parentheses, and so it creates this very clean DSL. And so when I do that, I want to say when something matches this predicate, and I can do all sorts of interesting things there. I can also specify custom filters there, gateway filters, and there are filters out of the box for things like rate limiting and load balancing and all that stuff and so on. But for our purposes, all I want to do is say when it matches that filter, then send it to something else. And in this case, I'm going to send it to a load balanced URL, and the URL will be to the beer catalog. Hello. Don't use Linux if you want stability, I guess. So I'm going to send it to a load balanced beer catalog service, which is going to resolve by talking to the registry. So that's a first way to get around it. Let's see if that works, right? So we should be able to go to either one of these URLs here. Single instance only. And port. Okay. What do we say this port runs on?
8081.
8081. Sweet. Thanks, man.
Did you know in Argentina, political parties have their own brands of beer?
Really?
Anyone from Argentina? Is it true?
Oh.
Maybe not anymore.
Well,
we do have Carlsberg in the list. When scientist Niels Bohr won the Nobel Prize in 1922, the Carlsberg Brewery gave him a perpetual supply of beer piped into his house.
that's so cool.
That'd be nice. Especially from a brewery, right? You never really run out.
Yeah. Well, unless they go out of business. That'd be sad. Let's see. What did I do wrong? Palm. Eureka client. That seems like it should be okay. LB : beer catalog service. Beer catalog service. That's the right name. They're both talking the same thing.
Maybe you need enable gateway annotation.
Sorry?
Enable gateway annotation.
I don't think so, but we could try. Yeah, that's deprecated. Computers say no. Let's see. I mean, I can always just look at the code. I guess that's an option. But I don't want to. Okay, fine, I will. So here we go. So, Edge service application. Did I do anything special? Web client. No, that's right there. Load balance. Oh, son of a gun, of course. Beers. I knew it. Something stupid.
Strings. See?
Yeah, strings.
It was all
gets in the way.
typed, then you wouldn't have that problem.
Type DNS. Okay, so what did I say? Beer catalog service. Or not. Original beers. Well, I don't approve. Gateway, beans, beer catalog service. one more time. Gateway route.
Needs to be in a bean.
Isn't it? It is not. Good catch there, buddy. All right. It's like Lisp. Gotta count your parentheses. All right. Hooray! All right. Very good. Thank you. So, yes, applause is absolutely not necessary. That would not have been miraculous if I were just a little bit smarter. So, there we go. We proxied the request to the downstream service. That's certainly one option. But I actually want to have I don't want to send all those beers back to the client, right? Our clients aren't, we owe our clients more than that. They don't pay us for all those terrible beers. They want the good ones only,
right.
And we want to filter out the bad ones. So rather than just proxying the data back and forth, we want to create a custom endpoint that returns a subset of those beers. And this is one of those things where we're going to go beyond just proxying data. We're going to actually do some sort of transformation. So let's create a router here. Using the same DSL we saw earlier. And we're going to create a new endpoint called good beers, like so. And the good beers endpoint is going to say server response.ok. What? We're going to send back data. But before we can do that, we're going to make calls to the downstream service, right? We're going to actually make a load balanced call to the downstream service and get the beers back. And then we're going to have to process them before they come back. So here, we're going to need a way to call the REST service. We could use the REST template. How many of you have used the REST template before, the HTTP workhorse in Spring itself? The REST template is certainly one option, but in Spring Framework 5, we have a new bean on the block called the web client. And the web client is a reactive HTTP client. You can use it for not just the normal things, but you can also use it for things like service end events, right? Because this is actually it's able to handle potentially unlimited amount of data, whereas the REST template, wants to wait for the end of the file and then process it and translate it. So we're going to use the web client here, and we're going to say that we want to configure a filter, and the filter that we're going to configure is a load balancing one. So ref load balancer, there you go. So I'm going to say LB filter equals ref load balance. Okay. Did you hear that? You heard that, right?
It's getting close to beer 30.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so we're going to build that. There we go. So I'm registering a new web client. This is actually just a, WC. It's a type web client, as you can imagine, like that, right? So I'm just going to return that back to the bean definition, and I'm going to use that beer client in this REST endpoint. So I'm going to say val client equals ref web client. All right, very good. And I'll say client dot get, and I'm going to call the downstream service, and the downstream service is going to be HTTP : // and I'm using the load balancing filter here in the creation of my web client because I need to call the service, but I need to do so through the service registry. I don't want to use DNS, right? That's the whole point. I'm going to get the benefits of the service registry. So here, I'm going to say call the service in the registry called the beer catalog service. And what's going to happen is it's going to pre-process this request. It's going to go to the service registry. It's going to get back all of the service instances, 1, 10, or 1,000 of them, whatever, and it's going to load balance. And by default, it's going to use a library called Ribbon, which is a client-side load balancer from Netflix. It's going to do that for us all in the blink of an eye. So I'm going to say call that service, get the beers data coming back, and we're going to retrieve the response, and we're going to turn the response that comes back into an object of a certain type. So I want to say give me back the JSON and turn it into a publisher containing elements of type beer, right? So we need to tell it what kind of data we want back here. And of course, in order for us to do that, we need to do something terrible, something that you should never ever do, not even when you're all by yourself at home, all alone, and no one is looking. We're going to copy and paste some code. We'll take this beer line and goodbye to you. Okay. We'll return that here, beer, class Java. And then we're going to filter And what we're going to do is we're going to filter the good beers, right? So val good beers equals, and then we're going to return that. So let me see. We're going to say server response dot OK dot body good beers. There we are. Okay, so now how do we filter? Which one should we get rid of?
Obviously Budweiser.
Yeah. So we're going to say beer. I'm going to say if we want bad beers, right? So we want to have a bad beers list. Val bad beers equals list of, convenient thing in Kotlin there. List of, and then what are the beers here that we want to? Yep. So we're going to get rid of. We don't want Budweiser. Okay, so we'll get rid of that. Do we want to? Is that a good one? Good. Duvel? Good.
Yeah.
Good.
How many you want to keep, Heineken? No.
Not a one.
Not a one.
Oh dear. Okay, Sapporo? Okay. Tsingtao? Okay. San Miguel? Oh, there's more than one. Kronenberg? Huh? Is that a goodbye?
But we're making a list of bad beers.
Oh yeah. Wait. Yeah, that's right. So is this good or bad? So
Good.
we
Take it
don't. So
out.
we want to get rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Kronenberg, Carlsberg.
Hmm.
So we want to keep it in the list.
Keep it in the list.
Okay. Good. I'm so confused.
Leave it in the list.
Leave it in the list.
Yeah.
This one.
That one's pretty good. You can take that one out.
We're saving it. All right. We've got a list of beers, and what I want to do is I want to say, if beer in bad beers. Does that work? No, sorry. If bad beers dot contains, there's a DSL here. Bad beers dot contains beer. If sorry, what happened? Oh, beer. Thank you. Brain not working. Okay, so if bad beer contains beer name, if not, then we want to keep it. So true. So actually, just there we go. There we are. Okay. So there's our custom filter. We're going to get back a list of beers, and let's see if that works. First of all, let's see if that gives us what we expect. Okay, single instance, good. So we should be able to go to localhost 8081, 8081, good beers. Is that working?
Yep.
So we've only got the good ones. Here's the full list. Here's the subset. Now the last wrinkle, of course, is that this downstream service may not be available, right? That service, right now it'll load balance. If there's one or more instances, it's going to work just fine. But I want to have a graceful degradation. I want to make sure that if there are 0 instances that I don't throw a 500 error or throw an exception. So I want to use a circuit breaker. So again, here I can just use this circuit breaker mechanism here. I'm going to use Hystrix. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying create a Hystrix command from the good beers variable there. And if there are no if the call to the downstream service should fail when trying to call this, then return an empty list, right? It's better than nothing, and so on. So we'll send that back. That's a circuit breaker around our call to the downstream service, but otherwise should work. Okay, one more time. Okay. Good. All right. So we have a robust service that'll do the right
kill
thing.
it to show them that what happens if...
Yes. Kill the actual service. Eureka service, Edge service, beer catalog service. Goodbye. Empty array list. Not a 500 error, not a stack trace, right? Which is better, right? This is a much better user experience than a big fat ASCII art middle finger, for example. Okay. Well, so we did it. We built a Kotlin reactive application that does the right thing in the face of service outages and topology changes. It'll load balance across the available instances. And we did it with nice type-safe Kotlin DSLs guiding us along the way. We looked at Spring 5 and did a whole bunch of stuff. Now for the main event. Let's build a client. So, what do you want to do now, my friend?
Well, I think we'll give you all a break, right?
Yeah.
So you can enjoy yourselves a little bit, and we'll come back in, let's say...
2 minutes. No? You can all go pee in 2 minutes, right? No? Okay, fine.
15?
15, yeah.
What time is it?
We got 100 minutes left.
Time. 14:50. Yeah. I need like 80 minutes, so...
Okay.
20 minutes.
No.
We'll see you back here at 10 after.
And if we have questions, we're happy to take them so far.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
One of the things that I like to do in my presentations, mostly because my company actually will send me with a bunch of stuff, is I have a bunch of swag. So I'm going to encourage you to ask questions, and you'll receive swag as part of that. For instance, this is a bunch of J-Hipster stickers, and I have a couple books, J-Hipster books, and a bunch of T-shirts that look like this one. So if you're curious or want any of those, let me know and ask questions. So the first thing we want to talk about is the client. What happens if, Josh builds this great Spring Cloud-based service and there's no client and you can't actually view it? Then you've got a problem. It doesn't really mean much unless you use curl or HTTP IE. Who thinks the client is easy to develop?
It's so hard.
Who thinks it used to be easy to develop back in like 2005, 6? Right, when you could just use struts, Spring MVC. Well, you don't have the same expectations now? Before, right. Now it's got to, have a spinner and stuff like that, and, also work offline. So we're going to build a beer client for what Josh just built, and this is what a beer client can look like sometimes.
Yep.
So what are you going to develop the client with today? Would you like to develop it with something like JSF? Maybe not. We're going to use Angular today, mostly because I know Angular really well. There's other JavaScript frameworks and other actual ways of developing progressive web apps. Angular is just one of those. So I like it because on their website they basically say one framework. It kind of sounds like one framework to rule them all, right? And everyone, I think, that builds some sort of UI framework usually wants this to happen where it's usable on TVs and phones and everywhere. And a lot's changed, since we were building applications back with JSF or even with struts or Spring MVC back in 2004 and 2005. I mean, in 2007, Apple released the iPhone with no native apps. There's only web apps. And in 2007, Chrome wasn't even released. Right? And then IE7 had just come out. And I don't know if you remember, but IE7 was pretty cool when it first came out, just like IE6 was cool when it first came out. They both ended up being the bane of our existence as web developers, but they were great when they first came out. So a lot's changed since then.
Document.all over document.layers.
Right.
That was a big difference for me.
Nowadays, you can actually run Linux in your browser with JavaScript. So this is a sample project here. You can navigate to that URL, and you can actually open up, with VI on there, a C file, and edit it, and then compile it all in the browser. So we're able to do a lot better things with JavaScript nowadays.
It boots Linux.
Right.
It boots Linux.
So you can compile in your browser.
Yeah. It finally happened.
But one of the biggest problems that we've had as web developers is we've given users a very bad user experience. And so there was a study done about a year ago, and this was part of a talk that Alex Russell did at the Chrome Developer Summit, where he cited a double-click report. And that report said that basically 3 seconds to page interaction on a 3G connection is what people want. And they found that 53% of sites are abandoned if a mobile site takes longer than 3 seconds to load. And the same report said the average mobile site loads in 19 seconds. And so we failed on mobile largely because we're using laptops like Josh's. We're using laptops like mine. Even though mine's not as fast as his, it's still pretty fast, and it's way faster than phones, right? And so we're testing when we're building these apps, and they're happening fast, but our laptop is filthy liar. So the way to get around that is to actually buy a $200 unlocked Android device. So if you're doing mobile first development and you're developing for mobile phones first, or even iPads or anything like that, make sure and test on those devices as you're building. You can also use the purple pattern. That's a great way, and I'll explain that a bit more. You can also use Chrome's developer tools to do throttling on the network, on the CPU, and you can make your screaming fast laptop into more of a slow phone that you're developing for. This is very important, and maybe not important for you if you're developing for a company and you're developing apps for their customers and everyone's on a fast connection or in an office. Not as big a deal, but if you're Facebook or if you're Google and you're just trying to get more people into your network so you can advertise to them, you want to target everyone in the world, right? You don't just want people on a fast connection. So that's why it's very important to them. And so the purple pattern is a way of basically you push critical resources for the initial route, you render the initial route, you pre-cache remaining routes, and you lazy load and create your remaining routes on demand. So this is a lot of what the Google engineers came up with, and then it basically got renamed to progressive web apps. So progressive web apps are basically a way for you to do similar to Josh is doing, but in a browser in the sense of your app will work offline. You can also install the app. So these are just the three things that Google tests for when you use its Lighthouse tool to actually see if you have a progressive web app. It makes sure it's on HTTPS, and make sure it loads while it's offline, and then it has a web app manifest, which allows you to install that app. And so if you have the flags properly turned on in Chrome, it'll actually prompt you to download and install it. And if you're on an Android device, I believe it's enabled by default. And for the longest time, progressive web apps weren't supported by Safari, and they weren't working on an iPhone, so everyone's like, whatever, a lot of hype. But just this summer, they've changed that. And so now, I believe in WebKit Nightly, it might even be in a release. Service workers are supported, and you get these features that are in progressive web apps. So Apple is no longer blocking progress in that sense. So let's get to coding and write an app.
Where's your beer emoji?
I forgot to put one on mine. Oh. And I got the laptop in front of me. I guess it'd be sitting on the table.
Yeah, right there.
That might be kind of cool.
Okay,
so what I did,
floor.
And I will forget to unmirror and mirror my monitor every once in a while, so please let me know when you're not seeing what I'm talking about. So we'll mirror those, and then should be able to see it all. And it's big enough, right? You don't need it bigger? Do you need it bigger in the back? Thumbs up? Thumbs up. All right. I think I can make it a little smaller. I'll try that. So I have all the services running. Josh and I have this project in GitHub under my username, so we'll have a link at the end, but basically github.com and Raible Cloud Native PWAs. So that's where everything's at. That's Kotlin Reactive is what he just did. He also did a Kotlin basic one that's in there, and it uses the regular Spring Boot stuff without the reactive stuff. And then we did a talk at VJug in August, and that one's archived in that folder.
And that has Java, Groovy, and Kotlin.
Right. And there's
YOLO.
a 90-minute video if you want to watch us do this all again. But basically, I have everything running here, those three services, and so I can go to localhost 8181 or 8081 good beers, and I updated the list, so it should match. Oh, we have PBR in there.
Ooh.
Gotta fix that. You guys familiar with PBR here? Pabst Blue Ribbon? It's this beer in the U.S. that regular wins awards, but we don't know why. So, I don't see it in there.
Are you
See
running?
PBR?
Did you rerun it?
Maybe not. So, this is the beer catalog service. All right, we got to restart that one. Okay, and in another window here, let's see. Exit that.
I've got so many. Oh, it's hard to look at.
So here is me just creating an Angular app using Angular CLI. So Angular CLI, you can see the date there, November 7th, right before we went on break. And then you just run ng new client. If you don't have Angular CLI installed, it's just npm install -g Angular CLI like that.
Don't do it now.
Or it'll
Please
all
don't
break
do it
down.
now.
Well, that's part of the reason I did it before this is because just in case, right?
you're not
You can
crazy.
see this only took 2 minutes and 14 seconds there. I've had it take up to 15 minutes before on a slow connection. So npm, like, you think Maven's bad. Like, Maven downloads internet, right? npm's like, hey, internet, bring your friends. Let's party. So that's our client, and we can run ng-serve is the command to basically do the Spring Boot run and get everything up and running. And it did already install everything, so that shouldn't be too painful. But it does have to compile everything from TypeScript to JavaScript by default. So it takes a little bit, but you can go back here and we'll leave
Check
that
the
one
list.
running there. We got to make sure PBR is out. Okay. Whew. Okay, that looks good now.
Call off the dogs.
So localhost 4200. Now I'm just going to switch to a cleaner client. And we'll make that a little bit bigger. So you can see it just has welcome. It's got an image. It's got a few things. So what we want to do is we want to get that beer list and display it in here. So we'll start. I can actually leave that running. And bump that font up a little. Going to client. And
Hey,
then,
Matt.
yeah.
Did you know there's a brewery in Germany that's almost 1,000 years old? It's been in continuous operation since the year 1040.
That's awesome. I got to go to Germany.
Beer memorial.
So you can generate code with Angular CLI. There's this ng command that we saw earlier with ng-serve, but you can also do generate service beer. All right, and that'll generate a beer service for us. You can also do nggs beer. So there's shortcuts for that stuff. We'll open this up in IntelliJ, or try. Hasn't been opening everything for me as much as I like recently. So it's right here. Open.
Did you know that 162,719 pints of Guinness beer are wasted each year due to mustaches? Who calculated that?
Right. So we'll make the fonts a bit bigger. So we have this beer service that I just generated. And by default, I don't like it in that directory. I like to create a shared directory and then put my services in there. So there we are. And with Angular 5, there's a new HTTP client. So if you've been doing Angular before, you might have used like HTTP, but now there's HTTP client, which causes confusion because there's one from Selenium as well. So make sure you choose the Angular one when you're doing your imports, and then we can write a method like getAll, which returns an observable, so similar to reactive programming here that Josh was showing. And this, you just do this, or you do return this HTTP get, and then we'll point to our service. You actually don't need the HTTP. You can do localhost 8081. Good beers.
This looks really similar to Kotlin.
Right, isn't that funny?
The constructor, the method name before the type,
But it doesn't like it for some
parenthesis,
reason.
parenthesis, around get all.
Yep. There we are.
The reactive programming. I mean, hopefully this should look familiar to both producer and
Right. I mean, it is very interesting how TypeScript and Kotlin look so similar, even down to the types, right? Where it's setting a local variable in this, and you can set it private or public, and yeah, very similar. So now we need a way to display that. So I'm going to do ng generate component. We'll call it beer list. And that does put it in the proper directory, so that's a little nicer. And we'll go ahead and, I don't know why it doesn't import that by default, but just found that bug today. If I import it, everything goes away. So now we need private beer service. And just to let you know, there are going to be mistakes made on purpose, so you see errors that happen when you're developing with Angular. I want to show you that, so when you see them after this, you're like, oh, okay, I understand that. Not just, wow, Matt made everything work. That's awesome. So this beer service, get all, and then you subscribe to that, and you can. The hard part is doing Java and TypeScript, fat arrow versus thin arrow. So you have to remember that, equals versus dash. But basically here, you can do this beers equals data, and then close that out. And you can also do, error equals console.error, so you at least see something happening. And then you got to figure out how many curly braces it has after that. I think that one doesn't go there, and that one does, and then you need like another one, and then it all works. And then you need beers, and then you can say it's an array if you want. But we don't have to create like a beers class. You can if you want it to be more typed, but we're not in this example. So we're getting them all, we're setting them to a local variable, and then we got to read them here. So we'll just do beer list, and then we'll do a div with there's some shortcuts I have. Beer of beers, and then we'll just show the name. Alright, and that should all work. Alright, who thinks it's going to work? Anyone know why it's not going to work? Okay, I'll show you.
Since you asked.
Since you asked. Alright, we got to get the console going, because you'll be like, why isn't it showing up there? So first of all, nothing happened, right? Well, we have this component here, beer list component. That's its name. We haven't told it anywhere where to render, right? So you have to go into your app component, and you can say, well, let's get rid of this stuff. Let's get rid of that image, and then let's just put it right here. And IntelliJ is smart enough to already know about it, so if you just start typing, it'll do it, and then it'll try to render that component. So you go back, and you're like, welcome to, it got close, but you got to make sure this is open, so you see the real errors. It's no provider for beer service. That's kind of intuitive once you get to know this stuff. So in the app module, you can add the beer service there. You can also do it in the component level, but then you have to do it for every component that you want to use that beer service in. So you add it there, and you're a little closer, and then HTTP client, no provider for HTTP client, so you got to go add that one too. But that's an import. That's part of Angular, so you can do HTTP client module.
So you're basically making making objects available for injection, right?
Right.
This should also look very familiar.
And now we're getting closer, right? But CORS, cross-origin resource sharing. A lot of people don't see this when they do JavaScript in Java projects because they bundle them all together in the same war and they don't have to worry about it. But I think for the most part, a lot of JavaScript developers and UI developers are developing the project separately, talking to APIs in some other place. So those APIs have to say, hey, this client can talk to me. So back here, we have this Edge service, and I told Josh about this just a few days ago. Hey, CORS doesn't work with Webflux, and he was like, whatever, kind of ignored me until about a half hour before this talk, and he figured it out in about 15 minutes. So I have that code right here.
It was like 45 minutes before the talk. Give me some credit.
So you can see here, all you have to do is register a bean, right? With CORS configuration and CORS web filter, and then you can apply the default values, which is basically wide open. So if you want to change that, then I have this commented out here. It shows you that you can set the allowed origins and specific headers and stuff like that. So if we do that and then restart, we just hope we restart the right one. Yep, Edge service. The whole talk really rides on this working. If this doesn't work, then we're going to just bail and throw t-shirts.
Get some beer.
Right. Well, you're right. And in fact, that's my backup plan. So let's see if this works first. Okay, so we're getting a list of names. But he's right. So we have that in this Cloud Native PWA's project. Let's see if you can just Google that. Looks good. So if you go in here, I just did it in this Kotlin basic one. But if you go into client, then basically there's this proxy conf.json that you could define. And so the difference is in that beer service, we wouldn't say localhost 8081. We'd just say /goodbeers, and then it would handle proxying that for us. And then for that to work, what I did is in package.json, I just changed the start, so you could run npm start, and it would pass in that proxy configuration. So that's one way to do it. But it only really makes sense if you're going to actually bundle your applications together in the end, if you're going to put it on the gateway service instead of having it, separate. So thanks for figuring that out, Josh.
Hey.
Big help. But this isn't that much fun because it's just a list of beers, right? So this is where it gets risky because I'm going to add a Giffy service where we take that name of the beer and we go out to Giffy and we see what animated GIF matches that. We haven't tested the names. This is risky here.
Oh.
So we'll do a new Giffy service. Sure, and I already have it here to make things a bit simpler. So you can see this Giffy API has an API key on there, and that is in a GitHub project, and they say, hey, use this for demos, so that's what I'm doing. If you, for some reason, plan on using Giffy in your production app, I would not recommend using this API key. Like, stuff's going to stop working. It's probably got rate limiting, but I haven't hit it yet. So basically, there's a get method in here where we take that API and we add a search term onto the end. You can see Q equals. We append that, and then we go and get it, and it gives us back a whole bunch of images. So we just grab the first one. And if there isn't any images to come back, then we give you the dancing cat image, which is always fun. Dancing cat. Right, so there might be a few of those with these beer names, who knows. So once you have that, you can go into that module, and we'll need to register it again because it's another provider. And then we can go into our beer list component here, and dependency injection. I don't know if you saw on the Giffy service, it's got this injectable at the top. So similar to inject in Java, a little bit different. It's got the parentheses on the end, but that's how you make services injectable. And then in here, you can say, for each beer, go ahead and call that Giffy service and take and grab the URL and set it to a local property. So, JavaScript and TypeScript is pretty cool in that way where you don't actually have to have properties on your objects. You can just create new ones. And then we can say image source equals beer Giffy. I'm kind of scared.
Oh.
You got to do an alt tag to be a good developer.
Can you make the screenshot appear over there so that I'm out of frame
when they come up?
If it goes bad.
Ready?
Oh, God.
Okay, there's a triple camel layout. Right, the Duvel's coming in. The Wi-Fi's not great.
It's
Poro. We must have spelled it wrong.
Yeah, probably.
Sing Tao.
Okay, San Miguel.
San Miguel.
What? Porter Magazine? Okay.
Well, no real bad ones. Oh.
Got that one right.
I think our time is up.
Yeah.
This one actually does animate, so yeah. I don't know what Quack is. That one hasn't come in yet. But the problem with this is if you went in here and went to network and clicked offline and refreshed, it doesn't work, right? So we want to make this into a progressive web app so it works. And these steps aren't as convenient as other ones, so I got a couple notes here on how to do it. But one of the things I like to do is make it just look a little better. I think one of the things and benefits that you get out of being a front-end UI developer is you get to make things look good. Even if someone else designed it, a lot of times you'll be implementing it, and when there's demos, it's fun to be like, yeah, I did that. Even though Josh did all the hard work and got us all the data, right? As a UI developer, like, you do the demos, and people are like, that guy, he really did a good job there.
Yeah, it's value to the system. You control the pixels.
Right. So the first thing is I'm just going to add Angular material. So yarn add Angular material. And there's a new requirement. The component development kit is part of that now. So if you just install Angular material and you don't install the component developer kit, then things fail. So we'll do that.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Did you know that Joan Evans is the only person on Earth capable of balancing 237 pints of beer atop his head?
That's a lot.
That's almost as many TypeScript classes.
We need a picture
and
of that.
NPM modules as you've got.
As I've written.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet I got more than that. I mean, here's something fun we can do. We'll just hopefully remember this window. CD client, and you run count lines of code. And we'll just let that go.
For a week.
So once this finishes installing, basically you have to import material design modules into your project to use material design components. I think it's very interesting because if you've been using Angular material for the last year, they've changed the name of their components and how they import stuff on almost every release. They haven't had a release candidate yet, so they're not as bad as Angular was last year because Angular was breaking stuff between release candidates. These guys are at least still saying, hey, we're beta. All right, we haven't released it yet. So I think if we look in, let's see, package.json, it hasn't made it there yet. Still working on it. Any questions?
You know, this isn't a fact for most people here, but for those of us who are from the States, this is awesome. It's novel. In France, Germany, Austria, and Spain, and the Netherlands, they serve beer in McDonald's. Did you know, I guess for you, did you know that they don't do that in the West, or further West? Sorry, what?
They don't, because they serve Budweiser.
They don't serve that either. They serve nothing. Also, should I just go for another one?
Yeah, go for it.
We're
We're waiting for npm install.
So, can somebody tell me if this is true? Because it's cold here, and I want to know if this is real. Because maybe I'll make a quick trip. You can swim in pools of beer in Austria. Is that a thing?
Anyone? Maybe like bathhouses.
Beer houses? Is that a bar pool?
And you drink and get clean at the same time?
You know those pools where they have a bar right in the pool?
Right.
Just
Vegas?
Yeah.
And usually a bathroom in the pool, too. kind of all goes hand in hand. All right, so I didn't think this was going to take so long. So we can write some code while that's finishing. So for the app component, I'm just going to give it a toolbar. So I got this little shortcut here. So mat toolbar for material design makes it look a little better. But to make that work, you have to use styles. So they come with a number of pre-built themes. If you clicked in this directory, you could see that there's deep purple amber, indigo pink, pink blue gray, and purple green. So if you go to material.angular.com or angular.io, you can see the different colors and the different themes. They actually have this little trigger up here where you can say I want to see it, and those different ones. So, and then all the components here are laid out. So for instance, that toolbar, you can see mat toolbar, and then the examples, they show what it looks like. And then for the API, they'll tell you that you actually need to import that specific toolbar. So how are we doing? Oh, we're done. Finally. Whew. That only took 3 minutes. Seemed like longer. So importing components, we'll do mat toolbar. Not Matt, me. Module, And then there's a mat list module. And then maybe a mat button module. Make sure all those are named right. So now if we go back to our app, we'll see if it's still running. Looks like it is. Oh, we're still offline. No, we aren't. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. All right, we got a toolbar. We want to make things look a little better in our beer list. So we can go into our HTML there, and we'll say, we'll use their mat list. And so I'm not going to do edit. I don't think we'll have time for that. So now it looks like it would on a mobile phone. A little bit better. We don't have the names in there though, so let me put that back. Okay. So now we got the names.
Nice.
We got the little dancing guys. But still it doesn't work offline, right? We haven't really done much there. So we need to go and add service worker support. And the way you do that with Angular CLI 1.5.0 differs from the way you do it with 1.6.0. But 1.6.0 hasn't been released yet. So we don't have to worry about that today. This is how you do it with 1.5. So Angular service worker is now a built-in thing that you can use. And service workers, how they work is they basically allow you to intercept network requests. And they operate on a background thread. So that allows you to do the caching and the offline abilities. Without that, there really wasn't any way to do that before except for like app cache. But it really wasn't doing like network requests and stuff like that. So what I've learned is that if you do it just like that, the latest release of service worker is 5.0.0. But when they released Angular CLI 1.5.0, they forgot to upgrade from 1.0.0-beta.16. So if you just install that one with Angular CLI 1.5, it's not going to work. So that's why you got to do the specific one here. And then Angular CLI actually supports service workers out of the box. So all you have to do with it is run ng set apps 0.serviceworker equals true. And the reason you have to have 0 in there is they do support multiple apps in a configuration. And that configuration is in Angular CLI.json. So it has where all the paths are, and you can change those. And it also has service worker false. So whatever we wrote didn't work. ng set apps true, not 0. Now we'll make sure it worked. There we go. And so now all you have to do is ng serve-prod. So the cool thing is it only works in production mode, which is great because if you think, what do they call them, single page apps, SPAs were bad because SPAs broke the back button. PWAs break the refresh button, right? And so as a web developer, you're like, oh man. Oh, it's already in use.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Did you know that beer was illegal until March 1st, 1989 in Iceland? Now, the date is celebrated every year in Reykjavik as, and I apologize for butchering the native word here, but Bjordagur or Beer Day.
Beer Day in Iceland. Does it have a date?
Yeah, March 1st, 1989.
Oh, hey. Need
Every
a
year.
conference in Iceland in
Right.
March.
This is a space.
So when you do the production build, it does do a lot more optimizations for you. You'll notice I didn't do ahead of time compiling. That's another flag, AOT. And that's actually going to be the default as soon as they can make the compiler fast enough in Angular. But this is something that you could struggle with if you actually enabled service workers on your project and then ran ngserve and nothing worked offline. It's because you're not doing the production build. So you need to make sure and do that. And as a developer, it's great because I struggle all the time with even practicing this demo before I do it in the talk because half the time I forget that it's stuck in my browser. And I pull up my browser to do the talk, and there's the finished app, right? And it's like, I forgot to delete it because it does get stuck in your browser. So we have it here. And what you can do is there's this application tab in Chrome that you can go to, and you can see the service worker information. So you can see the most important thing, I think they do this by default now, is they update on reload. So that did not used to be the default, which meant you could update your page and refresh as much as you wanted, and it would never pick up any changes. So now it updates on reload, and the other part is the manifest, which you can see we don't have there. And so at this point we should be able to do, I don't know why that's still running. Let's try. We should be able to do network, offline, refresh, and it comes back. So it's caching all that information. The reason it brought those images back too. So we're working offline. Now it's not going to work if you haven't cached that information before, right? You have to have made those requests in the beginning and then come back to it. So it all works offline now, but it's still not a great web app. And the reason we can test that is with Lighthouse, and this comes with Chrome. It's actually under Chrome Developer Tools in the Audit tab now, but it's a little harder to read that report. That's why I like having this little plugin up in the corner. But it basically evaluates whether you're a good progressive web app, and it also evaluates accessibility as well as performance of your app. So it'll let you know if you have things that you can improve there. And sometimes it does get stuck. So you notice if that stops like moving, then it's probably not working anymore. Cancel. Try again. And if you have your actual developer tools open, it'll warn you, and it doesn't work then either. But it basically runs a bunch of tests. Usually it's quick. Maybe we'll ignore it for a while.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
What happened to the CLOC? Can't land the code.
Oh, yeah, let's look at that bad boy.
I can hear your fans going.
It blew up on def size. It made it to 29,000 text files, though.
That was in the nodes.
We could try it
node
again.
npm directory.
Maybe it was like installing something at the same time.
You broke it.
Okay, so we're not doing very good on our progressive web app, right? We only got a 45 out of 100. Performance isn't great either. I blame that on Lighthouse because it wasn't actually working half that time. But there's no fallback when JavaScript isn't available. It's not on HTTPS. It doesn't redirect to HTTPS. Page load is fast enough on 3G, but it could be better. All kinds of stuff like that. So one of the things we need to do is actually install a manifest. So there's this site I like to use for that, real fave icon generator. Fave icon. There we are. .net. And then you can basically upload one. And so how did I find one? Free beer icons. That's how I found it. And then there's like a bunch of them. I think I have one on my hard drive here. Beer. And so then it shows you what it's going to look like on different devices, right? Here's iOS. We can say, actually make that a white background. Android looks okay. You can give it a name if you want to change the name. Looks okay on Windows. Mac OS Safari, not great. You can turn your picture into a monochrome icon, so that's kind of cool. And then I like to put in a path here because I don't like to put it in my root directory. So I do assets fave icon, and then you generate it. And it basically gives you a whole bunch of fave icons that will render on different devices. So once it finishes, we can download the package. And another reason to put it in assets is because in Angular CLI, anything you put in assets will automatically be copied over into your production build. If you don't put it in assets and you just put it in source, you'll actually have to go into that angular CLI.json file and list the files that you want to copy. So this makes it a bit easier. So we have all these fave icons here. So now we can go into our project, app, assets, fave icons. And then paste them in there. And so it gives you all the icons, but it also gives you this manifest.json, which is, you know, what you actually want to install your stuff.
It says fave icon, not icons.
Yeah, I think it's right. It'll tell us if it's not.
Okay.
But I want to show you some things that don't work. So it gives you a name. We want to call this PWA beers, but it doesn't give you a short name, which is one of the things that's required. So we'll call that beers. Because on some screens it just doesn't render that big. There's also background color. It has that in there. And you need a start URL. So they don't have that by default. Start URL is index.html. I think that's all we need. So now we should be able to go back to our browser and it'll prompt us to install. But it doesn't. Well, that's because you got to turn on some flags to do it. So enable add to shelf is one of them. Actually, they renamed that one, so it's now app banners. So enable that, and then the other one is bypass user engagement checks. Doesn't sound like something you should enable, right? So the last time Josh and I did this talk, it was great because we're on Hangouts, we're on Virtual Jug, and I do this step, and then I go relaunch now. And since we're on Virtual Jug, and it's all in Hangouts and Chrome, like it killed the whole thing. Luckily, we had it hooked up to his laptop, and I was demoing on mine for the sound, and so we could hear everyone on the other side going, "What did you guys just do? We lost you."
Oops.
So now refresh that guy. You should be able to go into application. I don't know why that doesn't work. We'll try a new one. If all else fails, always use incognito. Especially when I do a lot of security work and it's important for that. So, you can't do it in incognito. Never mind. Probably good for progressive web apps. So, if we look at our manifest now, you can see that something's wrong with it. So, the site cannot be installed. The page has no manifest link URL. So, that's why I have a shortcut for this one. Maybe. What was there? Oh, that's the CF manifest.
So close.
That one looks closer. So what was missing? We'll see. Oh, you know what? It's because in this index we didn't copy that. So where's my real? Oh, I killed everything. Real fave icon generator. Oh, it might have it in there. Nope. So it gives you all that HTML that you're supposed to put in your head, and I ignored that because I downloaded everything and didn't do that. We don't have to actually select anything. We can just, we still want to do this. Fave icons / assets, or no, assets / fave icons, and then we're going to need that HTML. They said the Wi-Fi was great this morning.
Yeah.
You guys all running NPM? All right.
Told you not to do it now.
So you put this in your head section of your page, and you can see this is what it was missing, right? The path to assets, fave icons, manifest.json. So when it says it doesn't have a link to it, that's what it means. And now, refresh. It's like Chrome's mad at me. So weird. I haven't experienced this one before.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah. You know it's good when you can't even.
In the 13th century, some people in Norway would baptize their children with beer.
Is that true?
I don't know.
Alright,
It's on the internet. They can't lie on the internet. It's impossible.
Okay, so now you see that add this site to your shelf at any time. But you can see it's not always that intuitive to get this stuff working. But once you do, you can click that, and then you actually end up with
nice
under your Chrome app. So depending on your device, this might actually end up on your home screen on an Android device, and it looks just like a regular app. And it opens up without the Chrome, around it and everything like that. So there's some other ones I have in here from the Weather Channel, for Postman, for Hacker News. So those just are, some examples. And the last thing we need to do is so if we were to run Lighthouse, it would tell us that we were actually missing a manifest in here. So there's not one for 5.12, which they recommend you have. So, oh no, there is. Last time I did this, there wasn't. So there is one this time. And then you need a no script. Right? So in here you can say no script, big H1. You must enable JavaScript to view this page.
Wrap it in a blink tag.
Right? I wonder if the blink tag still works.
Ah, darn it.
You want to try it?
I don't know.
You got to be backwards compatible, right?
Isn't there a web component that lets me get that?
It looks like it's not. Unknown.
Darn it. Web 3.0, man.
So I wonder if we...
Bring blink back.
Well, now we can run our test again. We were at like a 45 last time. Let's see if we do better.
Hey, Matt. In 1956, the U.S. exploded atomic bombs near a few beers to see if they are safe to drink. They are indeed. That's ridiculous.
So usually what happens around this point is it gets up to about an 80. And then if you want to get it to 100, you have to deploy. So we do have some scripts to deploy, so I'll run those, and hopefully those will work, and then I'll move on to the next demo.
Did they work last time?
We've never done them live.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
But I can show you them, and then we'll know. So Kotlin Reactive, everything's saved. So we have it under this Cloud Native PWAs. I put it under this one. It's just manifest, and then build. That's all I think we need. So we got a 64, right? Mostly due to HTTPS. So look, count lines of code, 2.6 million. We got some Bourne shell in there, some YAML, CoffeeScript, even some Lisp. And yeah, never even heard of this one. But yeah, that's all in node modules, right? So, well, let me show you just how to deploy real quick. I won't actually do it, but you can do ng build, and then you do -aot and -prod like that. And so that's going to build a project in the dist directory, and then you'll cd into dist, and you basically do touch static file for Cloud Foundry. And that's all. You don't need anything in that file. If you want to have push state enabled, so it's using HTML5 history push state, you can pipe it into that file, and that's what our deployment script does. So let me try that. So cd into Kotlin. Oh, you wanted reactive, right? This is the first test here.
Oh God.
Oh, I didn't.
Oh dear.
I didn't paste them in there. Gotta get them from here. Build and manifest. Josh wrote them, so if it doesn't work, it's his fault. Okay, build. Nope. We need that. We need that that one. And reactive. And so I'll show you the script because it's not fun to just watch it fail over and over, and I haven't shown you anything. So we copy that application cloud properties to the Edge service and the beer catalog service, and that has information about Eureka, and then it goes through and builds all the projects, and then it basically goes and deploys it, and see how it goes into the client here. It replaces that 8081 with PWA Edge, which is that Edge service in the back end, and then as long as that file's in the right spot, it should work, and then it does this dist static file, and then it does push state enabled. So we'll go ahead and add those, and then we'll run them. What was that about Maven? Oh, it doesn't like your dependencies version.
Embed Mongo.
Oh, embedded Mongo.
Who added that, huh?
Yeah, well, so Josh gives this to me, right, a few days ago, and he's like, yeah, I made this Kotlin stuff work great, right? It's using Mongo and everything, and I try to start it up, and it doesn't work at all. Well, because he's got this kick-ass laptop, he's got Mongo running at all times, and it just happens to work whenever he, creates a new app that uses Mongo. So I went ahead and added a couple of dependencies that allow you to do embedded Mongo. So that's in this project now, so you won't fail like I did.
But I'm not sure how it's going to work on Cloud Foundry. We should probably just run the regular one or bind Mongo.
It didn't work anyway. See, it's failing.
Okay, good. So just do the regular one.
Right. Well, I wanted to do a demo. It doesn't actually work with the reactive stuff anyway. So my company does authentication. I just want to show you how to do like OpenID Connect with Angular and how you do that with Spring Boot in the back end. So I'm going to close this one. And I'll close that one. I got to stop everything. Kill all Java. Usually that works. What? And exit that one. And so I'm going to, the basic ones, we just found out it doesn't work with the reactive stuff, but actually Spring Security 5 does support the reactive stuff, so I don't think it'll be too hard for us to get our stuff working with it, but that's why we have this Kotlin basic in there as well.
And to be fair, Spring Security 5 and the reactive support isn't even released yet, so...
Right, RC1.
Yeah, like...
Supposed to be released like Monday, though. I'm keeping track of that stuff.
Yeah, very soon.
That was the supposed to be date. So Kotlin basic, and then we'll start up the Eureka service first. Then we'll go into the beer catalog service. And then I'll just use IntelliJ for this last one.
You talked about, well, I'm not sure if this is if we already had this one before, but did you know that table beer of 1.5% alcohol was served in Belgian schools until the late 1980s? I think you mentioned something.
I didn't
like
have
that.
the alcohol content.
Yeah.
Right, it's so low that why not?
Yeah. YOLO.
YOLO. So I should start the client and make sure y'all see that this stuff works. And this, if it's not checked in, it will be, but we did check in this Kotlin basic stuff. I'm sure that's working. The reactive stuff for cores we just fixed. So if you try that out, it might not be quite working. Can be easy to get your commands confused. Okay, open, dev. Not that one, this one. So many. It's like Microsoft all over. Okay, so in this one, this is, it's interesting to look at because it's the basic way of doing it, right? You might be more familiar with this than the reactive way, but basically this is still using Kotlin. We have a Feign client, and it does the read for the beer catalog service, and then here's a REST controller adapter that has that fallback using Hystrix, and it filters out Coors Light, PBR, Budweiser, and Heineken, just some that we had in there. So to add our support for Okta, it's just Okta Maven boot.
Oh, and seeing that just reminded me. So that first demo did work with the val for the ID and the name, right?
Right.
That was awesome.
He asked about it? Yep.
TIL.
Now you can use that from now on, right?
Oh, yeah.
So basically, to wire up a Spring Boot app to use Okta's authentication service, you just basically use OAuth properties, issuer, client ID, and secret, which I did from creating an app on Okta. You could also create a Keycloak app, and this would work. The difference would be, instead of using like Okta properties and RStarter, you could actually just use OAuth from Spring Security, and their properties are Spring Security, or I think it's Security, OAuth 2, Security OAuth 2, and then similar. So if you're familiar with JHipster actually doesn't use anything from Okta or Keycloak. All it uses is Spring Security and its OAuth support, and it has OpenID Connect support as of like 2 releases ago. So once you have this in there, then you can start the application, and we're basically locked down, so we can't talk to it. IntelliJ's like, yeah, you're locked. All right, fine.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Did you know that beer cans in Japan have Braille on them so blind people don't confuse alcoholic drinks with soft drinks?
Oh, because they have all those vending machines, right?
Yeah. You can buy everything in vending machines
Cool that
there.
you can get beer out of vending machines. All right, so we're still at 64 there, so 4,200. That's not going to work anymore. If we go to localhost 8081, good beers. Full authentication is required, right? We can't communicate with that anymore. So to make it work in our client, that's still not going to work. Darn it. Open Cloud Native PWAs, Kotlin Basic Client, open. New window. And so we'll install what's a new SDK that we just came out with. So there's a number of ones that I want to make you aware of. This one, if you're doing Angular, is probably one of the best ones. OAuth 2 OIDC. And I've done several example apps with this. It works great. It's from this guy, Manfred Steyer, and it's OpenID certified. But basically, you can install it in your project. You have to configure the OAuth module for root, and then you just have to set a few properties, and it'll basically redirect to your provider and come back with an ID token. So that works pretty nice, and I'd recommend that. But we also have Okta Angular, which is on 0.08. So you can tell it's pretty new, and I've only found a couple bugs in it so far. So yarn add Okta Angular. Always the hardest part. Look at that, it's beta 12. So once that's in, then you can go into your app module. And you can basically do a configuration. So Okta config is a shortcut that I have. And it basically sets up the issuer, the redirect URL, and the client ID. One of the things that we've done in some of our examples is we actually pull in that issuer and everything from Spring Boot. Since it does have that information already, there's no reason to copy them in both places, so we just have that as an unprotected endpoint on the server. And then this 4200 implicit callback goes to this that we provide as a component. As soon as you import it, well, it might not be aware yet, but we'll go down here and do router module for root. So this is just standard routing with Angular, app roots. Oh, it's updating the indices. It's the only reason that I don't like IntelliJ. It doesn't really affect you at home that much, right? Because you're just like, I'll go get another cup of coffee or go to the restroom. But in demos, it updates those indices, and man, you're just like stuck. At least if you have live templates.
If only we had some sort of thing we could do to... Oh, wait. Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Did you know that Carlsberg's special brew beer was created for Winston Churchill in 1950 on the behest of the Danish government?
That's nice.
That's a nice gesture. I'm not
I
sure
like
why they
that
did
Carlsberg is in there a couple times, right?
that. Yeah. Lots of places are... There's a number of German and Scandinavian tidbits in this list.
So we import all those, and now we should be good to go. But we still need what's called an authentication interceptor. So in Angular 5 and actually Angular 4.3, they added the ability to do interceptors very easily on HTTP client. So we're just going to call this one auth interceptor. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to add a bearer token. So if you're familiar with OAuth and how that works, you'll get an ID token or an access token, it's called, on the client, and then you'll send that to the server, and you'll do it in a header. So this is how you do that with Angular 4.3. It implements HTTP interceptor. And what I found is the reason I have this request URL index of localhost is because if I send a bearer token to giffy, then it fails. It's like, hey, you're trying to authenticate, I don't know what you mean. So this is just how you do it. You basically set it on the request, and we get it from that Okta auth access token. And then we need a couple buttons. So in here we can basically say, so this is the number one thing that you need. When you do anything with routing in Angular, if you don't have that router outlet, you're just going to sit there and stare at your screen and wonder why nothing's happening, because nothing will actually go into that and you won't get any errors. But basically this button will allow you to log in, this button will allow you to log out, and then if they're authenticated, we'll show them the beer list. And so we do need to add that as a constructor. No, not that one. There we are. So then that'll be available. Those things should go away as long as I named it correctly. Yep. Oh, it died. Maybe we never had it running. And part of the reason I don't like to add this until the end is because if you add authentication, then you test for progressive web apps, you're just seeing the login screen over and over, right? And so that's not really that good of a test. And I don't know if we gave up on deploying, right?
Well, the reactive one.
Right.
The main one's already deployed, right?
So now you can see a login button there. And you'll notice that in this app component I had mat raised button, right? That's one of the material design things. But the reason that doesn't work is because I never imported it. So mat button module. And then down here, mat button. So if you see that with material, it's just because you haven't actually imported it properly. Takes a little bit to compile. Now it looks more like a material design button. So you click on that, it'll redirect to Okta. I don't know my password. I know that one's wrong, which is a good security deterrent, right? That logs me in, comes back to the app. Oh, it's missing the access control. Darn it. So this is interesting, and I did want to show this. So you see we have cross origin on the Good Beer service here in our Spring Boot app, right? And once you add most types of authentication or any security stuff, it doesn't work anymore. And so what you have to do is you have to add a CORS filter. This is what it looks like in Kotlin. And as long as you don't name it CORS filter, it'll work. And if you're doing Spring Boot 1.5.8 or below, you actually delete this part, and then it works. So this is a 2.0 and above. You import everything. And restart that. So CORS is always going to be an issue, even if you're doing security or not, especially when you have things running on different ports. The proxying does work if you actually bundle everything together in the end. It's not available yet. Oh, it's giving me a 401 now. Darn you. That's like, you failed, Matt. Nice try. And it doesn't really tell me anything back here. So let me check my properties before I give up. Head service. Oh, looks fine. And we got that guy. And we're doing 2.0, so OAuth. Well, we'll try it. Oh, it's there. It's just not. The login works. 14 minutes. We only got like 5 minutes left, so.
Yeah.
Hmm? Console.
It needs a hug. Can't resolve all parameters for app
We
components.
restarted. We restarted the wrong one.
What?
Look, it's got simple cores.
Is it the?
Is
it the reactive one?
Isn't it like it can't be in this or something like that?
Can you see what kind of bean is that? What kind of is that? Is that cores filter? Which package is that?
Cores. You think it's the wrong one?
Mm-hmm. Where did you put it?
Here, I got it right here.
No, that's the right one.
Enable version control. Then you compare it to your working branch. Maybe that is working. It's worth a try. Then we'll move on. But I did want to let you know that if you go to, and we don't have links for these, but basically everything that Josh and I have done today, I've plagiarized what he's done, and I've written them up as blog posts. So if you went to the Octoblog developer blog and you search for microservices, and you wait, there's a build a microservices architecture for microbrews with Spring Boot, and so that one doesn't have anything to do with authentication or anything. It just shows you how to build basically what Josh built, but with the older stuff, right? Not with Kotlin or not the newer stuff. And then if you do Bootiful, that's just Spring Boot and Angular. And then if you do progressive web apps, there's Ultimate Guide, and then there's also Build Your First Progressive Web Apps, which is just basically the demo that we did today. So try one more time. Looks like it's logging in, but it doesn't like good beers. 401. Oh well.
Rut roll.
Worked yesterday. It works on the branch too. So in our cloud native PWAs and that Kotlin basic, there's an Octa branch, and pretty sure everything works there. So it's not that easy, but it's not that hard. You do struggle with your browser a bit, and I think it depends on which browser you're using. In Safari it's not going to work very well, but in Chrome it will. And I invite you to check out JHipster. JHipster is a project that actually brings Spring Boot in, and it has Angular on the front end. We'll be talking a bit about that on Thursday when Deepu, the co-lead of JHipster, and I do a React versus Angular smackdown. There was also a microservices talk on it yesterday. But it's a Yeoman generates the project, and after that it's just regular TypeScript and Java code. I wrote a book. I have a couple copies up here if anyone wants it. You can also download it for free for InfoQ. So I kind of wish I didn't make it free because I think it's more popular when they aren't free. But it is free. And I wrote a real-world app for it called 21 Points. And how 21 Points works is I found that Spring Boot does a great job of monitoring its own health, right? It tells you when things are down via actuator. And so I wanted to do something similar for myself. So I had went on this 21-day sugar detox where my wife basically talked me into it, and her friend let her know about it only a few days before. And so that Monday when we started it, we found out that there's no alcohol allowed because it's got sugar in it. So that was like a rough start. So 3 weeks, no booze, no sugar, and we weren't even eating dairy or cheese or milk or anything like that. So in other words, it was great for my health, right? 3 weeks later, I had low blood pressure. I felt great. I had lost like 15 pounds. And so I realized, for me at least, that, not eating sugar is a big deal. And so I wanted to optimize my health. I'm getting older, and I was like, I should start exercising more, and I should stop drinking as much. And so what I made 21 Points is this app where you can get 3 points a day. So you can get 21 points in a week, and you get a point if you drink responsibly. So for me, that's like 2 glasses of wine or less. You get a point if you exercise, so maybe an hour walk or a half-hour jog or something like that. And you get a point if you eat no sugar. At least for me, it might be different for other people that have, different food symptoms or whatever. So I use it to track my health, and I keep notes in it. And the cool thing is I've been doing it now for about 3 years, and I can go back and look on any day, like what I did, because I made a notes column that's like 140 characters, right? You can't write too much. But it's funny because I can't really take screenshots and show it to people either, because it's like, boy, there was a real bender on Friday night. something like that. So, but otherwise, it's been a fun app to develop. The latest version is out there. You can use it. I don't know if registration is fixed. It was broken last week, but you can also download it from GitHub and run it yourself. And it's the example app for the book, so it's a real-world production app, and it's a sample app. And you can follow on jhipsterbook on Twitter if you want. But like I said, there's all these blog posts. If you download this presentation, I'll put it up on Speaker Deck at the end. I'm sure Devoxx will have a copy as well. All those links are clickable, or you could just copy and paste them, type them into Google, and you'll end up where you want to be. So we got 9 minutes left.
Yeah.
Time for questions.
Thank you, by the way.
Right, you guys sat here the whole time.
Yeah.
That's awesome.